Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, a story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 6. They laughed at this as heartily as children might have done. The constraint of the situation was a little relaxed, and Annixter, with sudden directness, glanced sharply at the young woman and demanded, "Well, Miss Hilma, hate me as much as ever?" "Oh, no, sir," she answered. I never said I hated you." "Well, dislike me then. I know you said that." I disliked what you did or tried to do. It made me angry and it hurt me. I shouldn't have said what I did that time, but it was your fault." "You mean you shouldn't have said you didn't like me?" asked Annixter. "Why?" Well, I don't dislike anybody," admitted Hilma. "Then I can take it that you don't dislike me? Is that it?" I don't dislike anybody," persisted Hilma. "Well, I asked you more than that, didn't I?" queried Annixter uneasily. "I asked you to like me, remember, the other day. I'm asking you that again now. I want you to like me." Hilma lifted her eyes inquiringly to his. In her words was an unmistakable ring of absolute sincerity. Innocently she inquired, "Why?" Annixter was struck speechless. In the face of such candor, such perfect ingenuousness, he was at a loss for any words. Well, he stammered. "Well, I don't know," he suddenly burst out. "That is," he went on, groping for his wits, I can't say exactly why. The idea of a colossal lie occurred to him, a thing actually royal. I like to have people who are around me like me," he declared. I like to be popular, understand? Yes, that's it," he continued, more reassured. I don't like the idea of anyone disliking me. That's the way I am. It's my nature." "Oh, then," returned Hilma, "you needn't bother. No, I don't dislike you." Well, that's good," declared Annixter judicially. "That's good. But hold on," he interrupted. "I'm forgetting. It's not enough to not dislike me. I want you to like me. How about that?" Hilma paused for a moment, glancing vaguely out of the doorway toward the lighted window of the dairy house, her head tilted. "I don't know that I ever thought about that," she said. "Well, think about it now," insisted Annixter. "But I never thought about liking anybody particularly," she observed. It's because I like everybody, don't you see?" "Well, you've got to like some people more than other people," hazarded Annixter. And I want to be one of those some people, savvy? Good Lord, I don't know how to say these fool things. I talk like a galoot when I get talking to female girls, and I can't lay my tongue to anything that sounds right. It isn't my nature. And look here, I lied when I said I like to have people like me to be popular. Rot. I don't care a curse about people's opinions of me. But there's a few people that are more to me than most others. Yeah, that chap Presley, for instance. And those people I do want to have like me. What they think counts. Pshaw, I know I've got enemies, piles of them. I can name you half a dozen men right now that are naturally itching to take a shot at me. How about this ranch? Don't I know? Can't I hear the men growling oaths under their breath after I've gone by? And in business ways, too, he went on, speaking half to himself. In Bonneville and all over the county, there's not a man of them that wouldn't howl for joy if they got a chance to down Buck Annixter. think I care? Why, I like it. I run my ranch to suit myself, and I play my game my own way. I'm a driver, I know it, and a bully too. Oh, I know what they call me. A brute beast, with a twist in my temper that would rile up a newborn lamb. And I'm crusty and pig-headed and obstinate. They say all that, but they've got to say, too, that I'm cleverer than any man jack in the running. There's nobody can get ahead of me. His eye snapped. Let 'em grind their teeth. They can't down me. When I shove my fist, there's not one of them that can open it. No, not with a chisel. He turned to Hilma again. Well, when a man's hated as much as that, it stands to reason, don't it, Miss Hilma, that the few friends he has got he wants to keep? I'm not such an entire swine to the people that know me best. That jackass Presley, for instance. I'd put my hand in the fire to do him a real service. Sometimes I get kind of lonesome. Wonder if you would understand. It's my fault, but there's not a horse about the place that don't lay his ears back when I get on him. There's not a dog don't put his tail between his legs as soon as I come near him. The cayuse isn't full yet here on King Sabe that can throw me, nor the dog whelped that would dare show his teeth at me. I kick that Irish setter every time I see him. But wonder what I'd do, though, if he didn't slink so much, if he wagged his tail and was glad to see me? So it all comes to this. I'd like to have you, well, sort of feel that I was a good friend of yours and like me because of it. The flame in the lamp on the wall in front of Hilma stretched upward, tall and thin, and began to smoke. She went over to where the lamp hung and, standing on tiptoe, lowered the wick. As she reached her hand up, Annixter noted how the somber, lurid red of the lamp made a warm reflection on her smooth, round arm. "Do you understand?" he queried. Yes, why yes," she answered, turning around. "It's very good of you to want to be a friend of mine. I didn't think so, though, when you tried to kiss me. But maybe it's all right since you've explained things. You see, I'm different from you. I like everybody to like me, and I like to like everybody. It makes one so much happier. You wouldn't believe it, but you ought to try it, sir, just to see. It's so good to be good to people, and to have people good to you. And everybody has always been so good to me, Mama and Papa, of course, and Billy, the stableman, and Montalegre, the Portuguese foreman, and the Chinese cook even, and Mr. Delaney, oh, he went away, and Mrs. Vaca and her little Delaney, hey?" demanded Annixter abruptly. "You and he were pretty good friends, were you?" "Oh, yes," she answered. "He was just as good to me. Every day in the summertime, he used to ride over to the seed ranch back of the mission and bring me a great armful of flowers, the prettiest things, and I used to pretend to pay him for them with dollars made of cheese that I cut out of the cheese with a biscuit cutter. It was such fun. We were the best of friends." "Yeah, there's another lamp smoking," growled Annixter. "Turn it down, will you? And see that someone sweeps this floor here. It's all littered up with pine needles. I've got a lot to do. Goodbye." "Goodbye, sir." Annixter returned to the ranch house, his teeth clenched, enraged, his face flushed. "Ah," he muttered. "Delaney, hey? Throwing it up to me that I fired him." His teeth gripped together more fiercely than ever. "The best of friends, eh? By God, I'll have that girl yet. I'll show that cowpuncher. Ain't I her employer, her boss? I'll show her and Delaney, too. It would be easy enough. And then Delaney can have her, if he wants her, after me." An evil light flashing from under his scalp spread over his face. The male instincts of possession, unreason, treacherous, oblique, came twisting to the surface. All the lower nature of the man, ignorant of women, racked at one and the same time with enmity and desire, roused itself like a hideous and abominable beast. And at the same moment, Hilma returned to her house, humming to herself as she walked, her white dress glowing with a shimmer of faint saffron light in the last ray of the afterglow. A little after 7:30, the first carry-all bearing the druggist of Bonneville and his womenfolk arrived in front of the new barn. Immediately afterward, an express wagon loaded down with swarming family of Spanish Mexicans, gorgeous in red and yellow colors, followed. Billy the stableman and his assistant took charge of the teams, unchecking the horses and hitching them to a fence back of the barn. Then Caraher, the saloon keeper, in derby hat, Prince Albert coat, pointing yellow shoes, and inevitable red necktie, drove into the yard on his buckboard, the delayed box of lemons under the seat. It looked as if the whole array of invited guests was to arrive in one unbroken procession, but for a long half-hour nobody else appeared. Annixter and Caraher withdrew to the harness room and promptly involved themselves in a wrangle as to the make-up of the famous punch. From time to time, their voices could be heard uplifted in clamorous argument. 2 quarts and a half and a cupful of chartreuse. Rot, I know better. Champagne, straight, and a dash of brandy. The druggist's wife and sister retired to the feed room, where a bureau with a swinging mirror had been placed for the convenience of the women. The druggist stood awkwardly outside the door of the feed room, his coat collar turned up against the drafts that drifted through the barn, his face troubled, debating anxiously as to the propriety of putting on his gloves. The Spanish-Mexican family, a father, mother, and 5 children, and sister-in-law, sat rigid on the edges of the hired chairs, silent, constrained, their eyes lowered, their elbows in at their sides, glancing furtively from under their eyebrows at the decorations or watching with intense absorption young Vaca, son of one of the division superintendents, who wore a checked coat and a white thread gloves, and who paced up and down the length of the barn, frowning, very important, whittling a wax candle over the floor to make it slippery for dancing. The musicians arrived, the city band of Bonneville, Annixter having managed to offend the leader of the Dorigo Club Orchestra at the very last moment, to such a point that he had refused his services. These members of the city band repaired at once to their platform in the corner. At every instant they laughed uproariously amongst themselves, joshing one of their number, a Frenchman whom they called Skizix. Their hilarity reverberated in a hollow metallic roll among the rafters overhead. The druggist observed to young Vaca as he passed by that he thought them pretty fresh just the same. I'm very busy, returned the young man, continuing on his way, still frowning and paring the stump of candle. 2 quarts and a half, 2 quarts and a half. Ah, yes, in a way that's so, and then again in a way it isn't. I know better. All along one side of the barn were a row of stalls, 14 of them, clean as yet, redolent of new-cut wood, the sawdust still in the cracks of the flooring. Deliberately, the druggist went from one to the other, pausing contemplatively before each. He returned down the line and again took up his position by the door of the feed room, nodding his head judicially as if satisfied. He decided to put on his gloves. By now it was quite dark. Outside, between the barn and the ranch houses, one could see a group of men on step-ladders lighting the festoons of Japanese lanterns. In the darkness, only their faces appeared here and there, high above the ground, seen in a haze of red, strange, grotesque. Gradually, as the multitude of lanterns were lit, the light spread. The grass underfoot looked like green excelsior. Another group of men invaded the barn itself, lighting the lamps and lanterns there. Soon the whole place was gleaming with points of light. Young Vaca, who had disappeared, returned with his pockets full of wax candles. He resumed his whittling, refusing to answer any questions, vociferating that he was busy. Outside there was a sound of hoofs and voices. More guests had arrived. The druggist, seized with confusion, terrified lest he had put on his gloves too soon, thrust his hands into his pockets. It was Cutter, Magnus Eric's division superintendent, who came bringing his wife and her 2 girl cousins. They had come from 15 miles by the trail from the far distant division house on 4 of Los Muertos and had ridden on horseback instead of driving. Mrs. Cutter could be heard declaring that she was nearly dead and felt more like going to bed than dancing. The 2 girl cousins, in dresses of dotted Swiss over blue sateen, were doing their utmost to pacify her. She could be heard protesting from moment to moment. One distinguished the phrases, "straight to my bed," "back nearly broken in 2," "never wanted to come in the first place." The druggist, observing Cutter take a pair of gloves from Mrs. Cutter's reticule, drew his hands from his pockets. But abruptly there was an interruption. In the musician's corner a scuffle broke out. A chair was overturned. There was a noise of imprecations mingled with shouts of derision. Skizix, the Frenchman, had turned upon the joshers. "Ah, no," he was heard to exclaim. "At the end of the end, it is too much. Kind of a bad canary. We will go to see about that. Aha! Let him close up his face before I demolish it with a good stroke of the fist." The men who were lighting the lanterns were obliged to intervene before he could be placated. Hooven and his wife and daughters arrived. Mina was carrying little Hilda, already asleep, in her arms. Mina looked very pretty, striking even, with her black hair, pale face, very red lips, and greenish-blue eyes. She was dressed in what had been Mrs. Hooven's wedding gown, a cheap affair of farmer satin. Mrs. Hooven had pendant earrings of imitation jet in her ears. Hooven was wearing an old frock coat of Magnus de Eric's, the sleeves too long, the shoulders absurdly too wide. He and Cutter at once entered into an excited conversation as to the ownership of a certain steer. "Why, the brand." "Ach Gott, der brand!" Hooven collapsed his head. "Ach, der brand! Dot makes me laugh some laughs. Dot's good, der brand. Don't I see 'em? Sure, the bull mit der black star by their forehead in der middle of... Any someone you ask tell you that is mine bull. You asked any someone. Der brand. To hell mit der brand. You ain't got some memory about the thing, I guess not." "Please step aside, gentlemen," said young Vaca, who was still making the rounds of the floor. Hooven whirled about. "Eh? What then?" he exclaimed, still excited, willing to be angry at one for the moment. "Don't you push so, you. I think perhaps you don't own this barn, eh?" "I'm busy, very busy," the young man pushed by with grave preoccupation. 2 quarts and a half, 2 quarts and a half. I know better, that's all rot." But the barn was filling up rapidly. At every moment there was a rattle of a newly arrived vehicle from outside. Guest after guest appeared in the doorway, singly or in couples or in families, or in garrulous parties of 5 and 6. Now it was Phelps and his mother from Los Muertos, now a foreman from Broderson's with his family, now a gaily apparelled clerk from Bonneville's store, solitary and bewildered, looking for a place to put his hat, now a couple of Spanish-Mexican girls from Guadalajara with coquettish effects of black and yellow about their dress, now a group of Osterman's tenants, Portuguese, swarthy with plastered hair and curled mustaches, redolent of cheap perfumes. Sarria arrived, his smooth, shiny face glistening with perspiration. He wore a new cassock and carried his broad-brimmed hat under his arm. His appearance made quite a stir. He passed from group to group, urbane, affable, shaking hands right and left. He assumed a set smile of amiability which never left his face the whole evening. But abruptly there was a veritable sensation. From out the little crowd that persistently huddled about the doorway came Osterman. He wore a dress suit with a white waistcoat and patent leather pumps. What a wonder! A little qualm of excitement spread around the barn. One exchanged nudges of the elbow with one's neighbor, whispering earnestly behind the hand. What astonishing clothes! Catch on to the coat-tails. It was a masquerade costume, maybe. That goat Osterman was such a josher, one never could tell what he would do next. The musicians began to tune up. From their corner came a medley of mellow sounds, the subdued chirps of the violins, the dull bourdon of the bass viol, the liquid gurgling of the flageolet, and the deep-toned snarl of the big horn, with now and then a rasping stridulating of the snare drum. A sense of gaiety began to spread throughout the assembly. At every moment the crowd increased. The aroma of new sawn timber and sawdust began to be mingled with the feminine odor of sachet and flowers. There was a babble of talk in the air, male baritone and soprano chatter, varied by an occasional note of laughter and the swish of stiffly starched petticoats. On the row of chairs that went around three sides of the wall, groups began to settle themselves. For a long time, the guests huddled closely to the doorway. The lower end of the floor was crowded. The upper end deserted, but by degrees the lines of white muslin and pink and blue sateen extended, dotted with the darker figures of men in black suits. The conversation grew louder as the timidity of the early moments wore off. Groups at a distance called back and forth. Conversations were carried on at a top voice. Once, even a whole party hurried across the floor from one side of the barn to the other. Annixter emerged from the harness room, his face red with wrangling. He took a position to the right of the door, shaking hands with newcomers, inviting them over and over again to cut loose and whoop it along. Into the ears of his more intimate male acquaintances he dropped a word as to punch and cigars in the harness room later on, winking with vast intelligence. Ranchers from remoter parts of the country appeared, Garnett from the Ruby Rancho, Keast from the ranch of the same name, Gethings of the San Pablo, Chattern of the Bonanza, and others, and still others, a score of them elderly men for the most part, bearded, slow of speech, deliberate, dressed in broadcloth. Old Broderson, who entered with his wife on his arm, fell in with his type, and with them came a certain Dabney, of whom nothing but his name was known, a silent old man, who made no friends, whom nobody knew or spoke to, who was seen only upon such occasions as this, coming from no one knew where, going, no one cared to inquire whither. Between 8 and half past, Magnus de Eric and his family were seen. Magnus's entry caused no little impression. Some said, "There's a governor," and called their companions' attention to the thin, erect figure, commanding, imposing, dominating all in his immediate neighborhood. Heron came with him, wearing a cutaway suit of black. He was undeniably handsome, young and fresh-looking, his cheeks highly colored, quite the finest-looking of all the younger men, blond, strong, with that certain courtliness of manner that had always made him liked. He took his mother upon his arm and conducted her to a seat by the side of Mrs. Broderson. Annie Derrick was very pretty that evening. She was dressed in a gray silk gown with a collar of pink velvet. Her light brown hair, that yet retained so much of its brightness, was transfixed by a high shell comb, very Spanish. But the look of uneasiness in her large eyes, the eyes of a young girl, was deepening every day. The expression of innocence and inquiry which they so easily assumed was disturbed by a faint suggestion of aversion, almost of terror. She settled herself in her place in the corner of the hall in the rear rank of chairs, a little frightened by the glare of lights, the hum of talk, and the shifting crowd, glad to be out of the way, to attract no attention, willing to obliterate herself. All at once, Annixter, who had just shaken hands with Dyke, his mother, and the little Tad, moved abruptly in his place, drawing in his breath sharply. The crowd around the great, wide-open main door of the barn had somewhat thinned out, and in the few groups that still remained, there he had suddenly recognized Mr. and Mrs. Tree and Hilma, making their way towards some empty seats near the entrance of the feed room. In the dusky light of the barn earlier in the evening, Annixter had not been able to see Hilma plainly. Now, however, as she passed before his eyes in the glittering radiance of the lamps and lanterns, he caught his breath in astonishment. Never had she appeared more beautiful in his eyes. It did not seem possible that this was the same girl whom he saw every day in and around the ranch house and dairy. The girl of simple calico frocks and plain shirt waists, who brought him his dinner, who made up his bed. Now he could not take his eyes from her. Hilma, for the first time, was wearing her hair done high upon her head. The thick, sweet-smelling masses, bitumen brown in the shadows, coruscated like golden filaments in the light. Her organdie frock was long, longer than any she had yet worn. It left a little of her neck and breast bare, and all of her arm. Annixter muttered an exclamation. Such arms! How did she manage to keep them hid on ordinary occasions? Big at the shoulder, tapering with delicious modulations to the elbow and wrist, overlaid with a delicate gleaming luster. As often as she turned her head, the movement sent a slow undulation over her neck and shoulders, the pale amber-tinted shadows under her chin coming and going over the creamy whiteness of the skin like the changing moire of silk. The pretty rose color of her cheek had deepened to a pale carnation. Annixter, his hands clasped behind him, stood watching. In a few moments, Hilma was surrounded by a group of young men clamoring for dances. They came from all corners of the barn, leaving the other girls precipitately, almost rudely. There could be little doubt as to who was to be the belle of the occasion. Hilma's little triumph was immediate and complete. Annixter could hear her voice from time to time, its usual velvety huskiness vibrating to a note of exuberant gaiety. All at once the orchestra swung off into a march, the Grand March. There was a great rush to secure partners. Young Vaca, still going the rounds, was pushed to one side. The gaily apparelled clerk from the Bonneville store lost his head in the confusion. He could not find his partner. He roamed wildly about the barn, bewildered, his eyes rolling. He resolved to prepare an elaborate program card on the back of an old envelope. Rapidly the line was formed, Hilma and Herr Derrick in the lead, Annixter having obstinately refused to engage in either march, set, or dance the whole evening. Soon the confused shuffling of feet settled to a measured cadence. The orchestra blared and wailed, the snare drum rolling at exact intervals, the cornet marking the time. It was 8:30. Annixter drew a long breath. Good, he muttered. The thing is underway at last. Singularly enough, Osterman also refused to dance. The week before, he had returned from Los Angeles, bursting with the importance of his mission. He had been successful. He had Disbrow in his pocket. He was impatient to pose before the others of the committee as a skillful political agent, a manipulator. He forgot his attitude of the early part of the evening when he had drawn attention to himself with his wonderful clothes. Now his comic actor's face, with its brownish red cheeks, protuberant ears, and horizontal slit of a mouth was overcast with gravity. His bald forehead was seamed with the wrinkles of responsibility. He drew Annixter into one of the empty stalls and began an elaborate explanation, glib, voluble, interminable, going over again in detail what he had reported to the committee in outline. I managed, I schemed, I kept dark, I lay low, but Annixter refused to listen. Oh, rot your schemes. There's a punch in the harness room that will make the hair grow on the top of your head in the place where the hair ought to grow. Come on, we'll round up some of the boys and walk into it. They edged their way around the hall outside the Grand March toward the harness room, picking up on their way Karaher, Dyke, Hooven, and old Broderson. Once in the harness room, Annixter shot the bolt. That affair outside, he observed, will take care of itself. But here's a little orphan child that gets lonesome without company. Annixter began ladling the punch, filling the glasses. Osterman proposed a toast to King Saba and the biggest barn, their elbows crooked in silence. Old Broderson set down his glass, wiping his long beard and remarking, That certainly is very, very agreeable. I remember a punch I drank on Christmas Day in '83, or no, it was '84. Well, anyhow, that punch, it was in Ukiah. It was '83. He wandered on aimlessly, unable to stop his flow of speech, losing himself in details, involving his talk in a hopeless maze of trivialities to which nobody paid any attention.